Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Nova Chronicles. 60 kilometers below the ground you are lying on, the rock is not solid, not liquid either, not in the way that water is liquid, not flowing freely in any direction gravity suggests. Something in between. Something that no everyday category of matter quite captures. The rock in the asthenosphere, the layer of the Earth's mantle that begins approximately 60 to 200 kilometers below the surface and that underlies every continent, every ocean floor, every mountain range, every city and every sleeping person on the planet, is hot enough to flow. Not quickly. Not in any way that a human lifetime or even a human civilization could perceive without instruments and centuries of patient measurement. But slowly, continuously, in response to the temperature differences and pressure gradients of the Earth's deep interior, the rock moves. It has been moving since before this planet had a solid surface. And where it moves, where it rises toward the surface in columns of slightly hotter, slightly less dense material that push upward through the rock above them over millions of years, and where the tectonic plates above it crack and separate and allow the rising material to reach the surface, where all of these conditions align in the specific way that the Earth's internal machinery occasionally produces, a volcano forms. Not with a bang. Not in an instant. A volcano forms the way everything significant forms in geology. Slowly, patiently, over time scales that make the word slowly itself feel inadequate. Over thousands of years of small eruptions, each one adding a thin layer of new rock to the growing structure. Over millions of years of the planet's internal heat finding its way to the surface through whatever crack or weakness the tectonic architecture provides. Over the full span of the Earth's 4.5 billion year history of building and rebuilding its own surface from the inside out. Every continent you can name was built by volcanoes. This is not a metaphor or a loose geological generalization. It is a precise description of the process by which the Earth's continental crust, the rock that forms the foundations of every landmass, every mountain range, every valley and plateau and plain that human civilization has been built on, was assembled from the volcanic output of the planet's interior across billions of years of geological time. The continents are the accumulated product of eruptions, of magma reaching the surface and cooling and building, layer by layer, into the thick, buoyant, silicon-rich rock that makes up the continental crust. The ground beneath you is cooled lava, not the ground in some distant volcanic region. The ground beneath your building, beneath the soil of the country you live in, beneath the bedrock that the soil formed on. At some point in the geological past, that rock was molten, was magma, was the same material that glows orange and moves slowly down a Hawaiian hillside in photographs that most people find simultaneously terrifying and beautiful. It has since cooled, crystallized, been buried and deformed and uplifted and eroded and reburied across hundreds of millions of years of geological cycling. But its origin is volcanic. You are lying on an ancient eruption. The image most people carry of a volcano is the dramatic version, the towering, symmetrical cone with a glowing summit, the pyroclastic flow cascading down the slope, the ash cloud rising into the stratosphere. It is not wrong. That image exists because volcanoes like that exist. Volcanoes like Mount Fuji in Japan and Mount Shasta in California, and the composite stratovolcanoes that line the Pacific Rim in the volcanic arc called the Ring of Fire. These are real, and they are spectacular, and the drama of their eruptions is genuine and well documented. But that image captures only one kind of volcano, and it misses the deeper story, the story of what a volcano actually is, not as an event but as a process. Not as a mountain that occasionally explodes, but as the surface expression of a planetary heat engine that has been running continuously since the Earth formed, that moves the material of the mantle toward the surface, and returns the material of the surface back into the mantle in a cycle so ancient and so fundamental that the rocks it produces carry in their chemistry the record of every stage of the Earth's 4.5 billion year thermal history. A volcano is not a mountain with a temper. A volcano is a window into the planet. Detectives looking at the chemistry of volcanic rocks, the specific ratios of isotopes, the trace element concentrations, the crystalline structures of the minerals that formed as the magma cooled, can read in those rocks the conditions that existed tens or hundreds of kilometers below the surface at the time of the eruption. The temperature and pressure of the magma source. The composition of the mantle rock from which the magma was produced. The amount of water and carbon dioxide dissolved in the melt. The depth at which the magma began to rise. Every volcano tells the story of the deep interior that produced it. And the deep interior, the mantle that lies between the thin crust and the iron core of the planet, extending from approximately 30 kilometers to 2,900 kilometers below the surface, is the largest and most active part of the Earth. It contains more than 80% of the planet's volume. It drives the movement of the tectonic plates. It regulates the long-term carbon cycle that determines the composition of the atmosphere. It produced the water in the oceans and the nitrogen in the air and the carbon in every living thing, releasing them over billions of years of volcanic outgassing from a planet that, when it first formed, had no ocean and no atmosphere and no life. The volcanoes made the world livable, not as a deliberate act, not with any awareness of the life that would eventually depend on the atmosphere they produced. Through the patient, continuous, geologically driven process of the Earth's interior delivering material to its surface, building the continents, filling the oceans, releasing the gases that became the air, cooling slowly from the hot, partially molten state it was in when the planet first assembled itself from the debris of the early solar system. You breathe the outgassing of 4 billion years of volcanic activity. Tonight we are going to descend, not as dramatically as a tectonic plate, not as violently as a pyroclastic flow, but with the slow, deliberate patience of magma rising through 60 kilometers of solid rock, into the story of how volcanoes form. From the heat source deep in the mantle, through the mechanisms that bring magma to the surface, through the specific geological settings where different types of volcano appear and the different worlds they create, to the place where all of it arrives in you, in the rock beneath you, in the air around you, in the carbon in your cells and the water in your blood, that a planet's volcanic history assembled and delivered over 4 billion years of patient geological work. If this slow descent is useful to you tonight, a quiet hour of deep heat and geological time and the patient, ancient, below-surface process of a planet building itself from the inside out, then I would gently invite you to subscribe or to leave a thought below about which part of this stays with you. It helps other people who are lying in their own darkness above their own ancient eruptions, also trying to let the day's heat dissipate into the quiet of tonight, find their way here, one layer of cooling lava at a time. But for now, there is only this. Allow your shoulders to soften. Let your breathing slow, not pushed, not measured, just allowed to find the pace it finds when the body is warm and the room is dark and nothing is asking for speed. The pace of cooling rock. The pace of a planet that has been doing its essential work for 4.5 billion years and has never once rushed. 60 kilometers below you, the rock is moving, slowly, certainly, toward the surface. It has been moving all your life. It will be moving while you sleep. Let's begin. Magma does not simply exist. It is made. The rock of the Earth's mantle, the solid, crystalline, mineral-rich rock that makes up the vast majority of the planet's volume, is not magma. It is solid. It has been solid across most of its depth and most of its history for billions of years. The common image of the Earth's interior as a sea of molten rock, with a thin solid crust floating on top like a raft on a lava lake, is wrong. The mantle is solid. The core is iron, liquid in its outer layer, solid at its center. The crust is solid. The Earth is, by volume, overwhelmingly a solid planet. Magma forms in specific places, under specific conditions, through specific physical and chemical processes that the Earth's internal machinery produces at particular locations. The 3 tectonic settings where the conditions for melting can be achieved. The first setting is a subduction zone, where 2 tectonic plates converge, where an oceanic plate, denser and thinner than the continental plate it is colliding with, is forced downward beneath the continental plate and descends into the mantle at angles of up to 70 degrees. Something happens to the rock of the descending plate that the surrounding mantle rock cannot ignore. The oceanic plate carries water. Not just surface water trapped in its cracks and pores, but water chemically bound into the minerals of the plate's basaltic rock. Hydrated minerals that were formed in contact with seawater at the ocean floor and that carry their water into the mantle as the plate descends. And water, when it is released from those minerals under the heat and pressure of the subducting plate, does something to the mantle rock above it that temperature alone cannot do. It lowers the melting point. The rock of the mantle at subduction zone depths is close to its melting temperature, hot enough that a small reduction in melting point is sufficient to push it over the threshold. The water released from the descending plate provides exactly that reduction. The mantle rock above the subducting slab begins to melt. Partial melting, not the complete liquefaction of the rock, but the selective melting of the minerals with the lowest melting points, producing a melt that is chemically distinct from the rock it came from, richer in silica and water, more viscous, and charged with the dissolved gases, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, water vapor, that will drive the eruption when the magma eventually reaches the surface. This is the magma of the Ring of Fire, the explosive magma, the thick, gas-rich, high silica melt that produces the towering stratovolcanoes of the Pacific Rim, Mount Pinatubo, Mount St. Helens, Mount Ruapehu, and the catastrophic eruptions that have marked the geological record with layers of ash detectable across thousands of kilometers of surrounding landscape. The viscosity of this magma, its resistance to flow, produced by its high silica content, prevents the dissolved gases from escaping gradually as the magma rises. The pressure builds, and when the magma finally reaches a point where the confining pressure of the rock above it drops below the pressure of the gases trying to escape, it does not simply flow. It detonates. The 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens in Washington state released energy equivalent to approximately 1,600 nuclear bombs of the size dropped on Hiroshima. In a single morning, from a mountain that, the evening before, had been a destination for hikers and a subject for landscape photographers. 1,600 nuclear bombs. Before breakfast. Your body contains approximately 10 trillion cells, each one surrounded by a membrane under pressure, the osmotic pressure of the cell's contents pressing outward against the membrane that contains it. The pressure is small. The membrane is resilient. The system is stable. But remove the membrane, compromise its integrity, and the cell's contents discharge outward with a speed and a completeness that no gradual process could produce. The volcano and your cell are running the same physics. Pressure contained by a membrane. Stability maintained by the integrity of the barrier. Catastrophic release when the barrier fails. The second tectonic setting is a hotspot. A hotspot is a fixed column of unusually hot mantle material, a mantle plume, that rises from deep in the mantle, possibly from the boundary between the mantle and the core at 2,900 kilometers depth, and produces melting in the lithosphere above it as it approaches the surface. Unlike subduction zone magma, hotspot magma is produced not by the addition of water to the mantle, but by the simple delivery of more heat to the base of the lithosphere than the surrounding mantle provides. The rock above the plume melts because it is hotter than it should be at that depth, heated from below by the rising column of exceptionally warm mantle material. Hotspot magma is different in character from subduction magma. Lower in silica, lower in dissolved water, less viscous, less explosive. It flows rather than detonates, producing the broad, flat shield volcanoes of Hawaii, where lava rivers move across the landscape at speeds that a person can walk away from, building gently sloping mountains of accumulated basalt that cover enormous areas but rise to modest heights relative to their width. Mauna Kea, the tallest mountain on Earth measured from its base on the ocean floor, is a hotspot shield volcano, 65 kilometers wide at its base, built up over approximately 1 million years of lava flow accumulation from the same Hawaiian hotspot that is currently active beneath the Big Island. Its summit stands 4,205 meters above sea level. Its base sits approximately 6 kilometers below the ocean surface. Total height from base to summit, approximately 10 kilometers. 10 kilometers of accumulated basalt, built by a hotspot. One lava flow at a time. Detectives looking at the geochemistry of hotspot lavas from different locations around the world revealed something that connects the surface eruptions of hotspot volcanoes to the deepest structure of the Earth. The isotopic ratios of certain elements in hotspot lavas, particularly lead and helium, are different from the ratios in the lavas produced at mid-ocean ridges and subduction zones. The difference indicates that the source material for hotspot lavas comes from a part of the mantle that has been isolated from the rest of the mantle's chemical cycling for billions of years, a deep reservoir of ancient mantle material that has been sitting, undisturbed, in the deep Earth since the early stages of the planet's formation. Hotspot lavas carry the chemical signature of the early Earth. When Kilauea erupts in Hawaii, when the lava reaches the ocean and the contact produces the billowing clouds of steam and hydrochloric acid that Hawaiian residents call lays, the material flowing into the sea carries in its chemistry the isotopic signature of mantle rock that has been sitting in the deep Earth since before life existed on this planet. Ancient material. 4-billion-year-old material. Reaching the surface for the first time, in some cases, since the planet first differentiated into crust and mantle and core. The lava touching the Hawaiian Ocean right now may be making its first contact with the surface world. The third tectonic setting is a rift zone, where two tectonic plates are pulling apart, where the lithosphere is being stretched and thinned by the divergent movement of the plates. The reduced pressure on the mantle rock below the rift causes it to melt, not through the addition of heat or water, but through decompression. The same physics that makes dissolved gas bubble out of a carbonated drink when you reduce the pressure by opening the bottle operates in the mantle when the lithosphere above it thins and the confining pressure drops. The mantle decompresses and melts. Rift zone volcanoes produce the basaltic lava of the mid-ocean ridges, the dark, fluid, low-viscosity melt that erupts relatively quietly along the spreading centers at the bottom of every ocean, building the oceanic crust that eventually subducts back into the mantle at convergent margins. The mid-ocean ridge system, the 65,000-kilometer chain of underwater mountains we encountered in the deep ocean journey, is the largest volcanic system on Earth. It erupts approximately 3 cubic kilometers of new lava every year, along its entire length, in the dark at the bottom of the ocean, mostly unobserved and mostly unreported. 3 cubic kilometers per year, every year, in the dark. Now consider what happens between the magma's formation in the mantle and its eventual eruption at the surface. The magma rises, buoyant because it is less dense than the solid rock surrounding it, moving upward through the fractured and permeable rock of the crust at rates of meters per hour in some cases, collecting in magma chambers, cavities in the crust where the rising melt accumulates, degasses partially, differentiates chemically as different minerals crystallize at different temperatures, and builds pressure against the rock walls confining it. The magma chamber is where the volcano charges itself. The largest magma chambers on Earth are not beneath the towering stratovolcanoes of the Ring of Fire. They are beneath the supervolcanoes, the caldera systems whose eruptions are so large and so catastrophic that they don't produce a cone at all. They produce a collapse. The magma erupts so rapidly and in such volume that the ground above the chamber falls inward, creating a depression, a caldera, that can be tens of kilometers across and hundreds of meters deep, the landscape subsiding into the void left by the evacuated magma. Yellowstone is a supervolcano. Beneath the national park that receives approximately 4 million visitors per year, beneath the geysers and the hot springs and the bison herds and the tourists photographing the prismatic pools, sits a magma reservoir that detectives looking at seismic tomography data revealed extends approximately 90 kilometers long, 40 kilometers wide, and between 5 and 16 kilometers thick. 90 kilometers long, 40 kilometers wide, an area of magma roughly equal to the area of the state of Delaware, sitting between 5 and 16 kilometers below the surface of one of the most visited national parks in the United States. The Yellowstone system last erupted in a full caldera-forming eruption approximately 640,000 years ago, an eruption that ejected approximately 1,000 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. 1,000 cubic kilometers. If you spread that material across the entire contiguous United States, all 48 states, an area of approximately 7.6 million square kilometers, it would cover the country to a depth of approximately 13 centimeters. 13 centimeters of volcanic ash across the entire continental United States from a single eruption. The ash layer from that eruption is detectable in sediment cores from as far away as California and Kansas, a sharp, chemically distinctive layer in the geological record that marks the moment 640,000 years ago when a portion of Wyoming essentially exploded. Your heart beats approximately 100,000 times per day. 100,000 individual pressure cycles, the left ventricle contracting, the valves opening, the blood surging through the aorta into the arterial system, the pressure rising and falling in the precisely controlled rhythm of a system that has been running since before you were born. Each beat generates a pressure wave that travels through your arteries at approximately 6 to 9 meters per second, much faster than the blood itself moves, and that is detectable at your wrist as your pulse. Your cardiovascular system is a pressure system. A system of chambers, the heart's ventricles, that build pressure against a containing wall and release it in controlled pulses that move material, blood, not lava, through a network of channels to where it is needed. The magma chamber builds pressure against the rock above it and releases it, sometimes gradually, sometimes catastrophically, through a network of conduits to the surface. Both systems are pressure chambers with outlets. Both systems will, if the pressure builds faster than the outlet can release it, reach a threshold. Both systems have been managing that threshold, in their respective ways, for the entirety of their existence. Yours has been managing it all day. Right now, as your breathing slows and your heart rate drops toward its resting minimum, the pressure in your cardiovascular system is falling. The arteries dilating slightly, the cardiac output reducing, the whole system shifting from the higher pressure state of waking activity to the lower pressure state of rest that your body maintains during sleep. The volcano is also resting tonight. In the dark below its surface, the magma chamber sits, accumulating pressure at its geological pace, too slowly to measure in a human lifetime, too steadily to ignore across geological time. It is not threatening. It is simply being what it is, a pressure system in a state of dynamic equilibrium, managed by the same planetary forces that built it, that will eventually produce the next eruption in the same way that the 60 previous eruptions at that location produced their events. Patient, certain, in no hurry at all, as you are, right now. The lava stops, not suddenly, not with the finality of a switch being thrown. It slows, the flow that was moving at several meters per second on the steep upper slope decelerating to centimeters per second as it reaches flatter ground, thickening as it cools, the leading edge hardening into a dark, ropey, brittle crust while the interior continues to move beneath it, the whole mass gradually losing the heat that kept it fluid, crystallizing from the outside in, the last movement dying somewhere in the middle of what is now a field of solid black rock that was, hours or days ago, the glowing, flowing surface of the Earth's interior. The eruption is over. The silence that follows a volcanic eruption is one of the most complete silences on Earth. Not the silence of an empty room or a quiet forest. The specific silence of a landscape from which every living thing has been removed or driven away, in which the normal biological soundtrack of insects and birds and the wind and vegetation is absent because there is no vegetation, and there are no insects, and the birds have not yet returned, and what remains is the cooling rock and the settling ash and the thin hiss of steam still rising from cracks where residual heat meets groundwater, percolating through the new material. The landscape is reset, and then, within days of the lava cooling to the point where it can be walked on, sometimes within hours, In the case of surfaces that cool fastest, the first thing arrives. Wind. Not as a visitor, as a carrier. The wind that moves across the surface of the new lava field carries, suspended in its passage, the same material it carries everywhere: spores, seeds, dust particles, the microscopic fragments of biological material that drift in the lower atmosphere continuously, invisibly, above every landscape on Earth. Most of this material lands on surfaces that already have established communities and finds no available space to colonize. On the new lava field, every surface is available. Every crack is unoccupied. Every patch of cooled rock is a blank page. The first colonizers are the same organisms that colonize every new surface: the cyanobacteria and the lichens and the mosses that arrived on the new volcanic islands we explored in an earlier journey. But on the flanks of an active volcano, their work is accelerated by something that bare ocean islands lack: heat. The residual heat in newly cooled lava, the heat that seeps upward from the still warm interior of the flow for months or years after the surface has solidified, creates a microclimate in the immediate surface layer of the rock that accelerates the chemical weathering that begins the conversion of basalt to soil. The warm rock surface contracts and expands with the daily temperature cycle more dramatically than cold rock would, widening cracks faster. The warm moisture that condenses in those cracks reacts with the basalt minerals more aggressively than cold moisture would. The microbial communities that colonize the warm surface metabolize faster, produce their mineral-dissolving acids faster, accumulate their organic residue faster. The volcano's residual heat is its own accelerant for the life that follows it. Detectives looking at the rate of primary succession, the biological colonization of bare volcanic rock, on lava flows of known age in Hawaii revealed that the process operates on timescales that vary dramatically depending on the climate of the location. On the wet, windward slopes of the Big Island, where rainfall exceeds 4,000 millimeters per year, bare lava flows can develop a visible plant community within decades and a closed canopy forest within centuries. On the dry, leeward slopes, where rainfall is less than 300 millimeters per year, the same process takes thousands of years. The difference between decades and thousands of years. For the same rock, on the same island, produced by rain. The most fertile agricultural soils on Earth are volcanic. This is not a coincidence of geography, not simply the result of fertile volcanic regions happening to be where human civilizations chose to settle. It is a direct consequence of the specific chemical composition of volcanic rock, which contains, in its freshly erupted form, a combination of minerals that weathers into soil with a richness of plant-available nutrients that most other rock types cannot match. Phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, iron, the elements that plants need to build their cellular machinery, present in the volcanic minerals in forms that the processes of weathering and biological activity convert, over decades to centuries, into the dissolved, accessible forms that plant roots can absorb. The island of Java in Indonesia, one of the most densely populated islands on Earth, home to approximately 150 million people on an area of approximately 130,000 square kilometers, is densely populated precisely because it is volcanic. Its soils, derived from the weathering of the volcanic rock deposited by the chain of active volcanoes that runs along its spine, are among the most productive agricultural soils in Southeast Asia. Java's population density, approximately 1,100 people per square kilometer, roughly 20 times the global average, is, in a direct and traceable sense, the product of volcanic fertility. 150 million people, sustained by volcanic soil. Your own body requires the same elements that volcanic soil provides to plants. The phosphorus in your DNA, the element that forms the backbone of every strand of genetic material in every cell of your body, came to you through food. The food grew in soil. The soils. Phosphorus came from the weathering of rock. In many of the world's most productive agricultural regions, that rock is volcanic. The phosphorus in your DNA traces back, through the food chain and the soil and the weathering of rock, to the eruption that deposited the material from which the soil formed. The volcano built your genetic material. Not quickly, not directly, but through the long, patient chain of geological and biological processes that connects the eruption to the soil, to the plant, to the food, to you. Now follow the heat further. Not the heat of the eruption itself, but the sustained, lower-level geothermal heat that persists in volcanically active regions for millions of years after the most dramatic eruptions have subsided. The heat that drives the hot springs and the geysers and the fumaroles that are the visible surface expression of a still warm crust in regions of active or recent volcanism. Geysers are pressure systems. The same fundamental physics as the magma chamber. Water heated under pressure, dissolved gas expanding, the pressure exceeding the confining pressure of the overlying water column, the discharge erupting upward, operating at a smaller scale, with water instead of magma, at temperatures that allow the process to repeat itself every few minutes rather than every few 100,000 years. Old Faithful in Yellowstone erupts approximately every 90 minutes, to a height of approximately 30 to 50 meters, expelling approximately 30,000 liters of near-boiling water per eruption. 30,000 liters. Every 90 minutes. From a crack in the ground. The heat driving Old Faithful is the same heat that drives the Yellowstone magma chamber, the same mantle plume that we encountered in Movement 2, its energy distributed through the hydrothermal system that underlies the park, surfacing in 10,000 thermal features spread across 8,900 square kilometers of landscape. But the most extraordinary expression of geothermal heat in a volcanic landscape is not the geyser or the fumarole or the hot spring. It is the forest. Detectives looking at the vegetation communities on the flanks of active volcanoes around the world revealed a pattern that initially seems paradoxical. The most species-rich, most biologically diverse forests on Earth are not in the oldest, most stable geological environments. Not in the ancient cratons of Africa and Australia, where the rock has been undisturbed for billions of years. They are in young, volcanically active landscapes, in the tropical forests of Indonesia and the Philippines and Central America, growing on soils derived from recent volcanic deposits, in climates kept warm and moist by the same atmospheric circulation patterns that drive the rainfall that converts volcanic rock to soil so quickly. The biological diversity of the tropical volcanic forest is the product of the same disturbance cycle that makes volcanoes seem hostile to life. Eruptions clear the landscape. The cleared landscape is recolonized by whatever species can reach it and establish themselves on the new substrate. Different species arrive at different times, establish at different rates, create the specific community structure of the early successional forest. Over decades to centuries, the community changes as later successional species arrive and the earlier colonizers are shaded out or outcompete. The landscape passes through a succession of different community states, each one creating the conditions for the next, until the mature forest is reached. A community so different from the bare lava it began on that no casual observer would connect the two. The volcano does not destroy the forest. It renews it. Not on any timescale that feels comfortable to the organisms displaced by each eruption. Not with any gentleness toward the specific community that existed before the lava arrived. But across geological time, the only timescale on which the volcano's relationship with the living world can be properly evaluated, the disturbance and renewal cycle that eruptions drive produces landscapes of greater biological diversity than any undisturbed system would develop. The volcano is the landscape's gardener. A gardener that clears with fire and builds with mineral wealth, and asks only patience from whatever intends to grow in what it leaves behind. And the landscape always grows back. Always. In 50 years on the flanks of Kilauea, a bare lava flow becomes a fern forest. In 500 years, the fern forest becomes a canopy of native Lehua trees, whose red flowers are pollinated by native honey creepers found nowhere else on Earth. In 5,000 years, the forest becomes the dense, layered, species-rich community of the mature Hawaiian rainforest. A community so specifically adapted to the volcanic landscape it grows on that every species in it carries, in its biology, the record of the volcanic history that shaped the island. The forest is a record of the eruptions that preceded it. just as you are a record of the volcanic history that produced the soil that grew the food that became your body. Both of you, the forest and you, are the lava's slow legacy. Both of you carrying, in your chemistry, the minerals that the volcano delivered to the surface from the deep mantle, and that the biological processes of weathering and succession and food chains converted, over the patient span of geological and evolutionary time, into the living material you are made of. The lava cooled. The rain dissolved it. The microbes colonized it. The plants rooted in it. The food grew from it. And here you are, warm, still, dark, lying above an ancient eruption, breathing the air that 4 billion years of volcanic outgassing assembled, made of the minerals that volcanic soils released into the food chain across the generations of your ancestors. The volcano built you, patiently, indirectly, without any awareness of what it was building, one lava flow at a time. On the morning of the 24th of August, in the year 79 CE, the residents of Pompeii were going about their business. The markets were open. The baths were heated. Bread was baking in the ovens of the bakeries that archaeologists would excavate nearly 2,000 years later, finding the Carbonese loaves still in their pans, still bearing the baker's stamp that identified them as the product of a specific establishment on a specific street in a city that had, that morning, approximately 11,000 people in it going about the ordinary business of an ordinary day in the Roman world. By evening, most of them were dead. Vesuvius had not been understood as a volcano. The mountain behind the city was a green hill, its fertile slopes covered in the vineyards that produced some of the most prized wine in the Roman world, its summit a pleasant destination for walks, its occasional tremors dismissed as the normal restlessness of the ground in a seismically active region. There had been a significant earthquake 17 years earlier, in 62 CE, that had damaged parts of Pompeii and required extensive rebuilding. The rebuilding was still incomplete when the eruption began. The eruption column reached approximately 33 kilometers into the atmosphere. 33 kilometers. The cruising altitude of a commercial aircraft is approximately 10 to 12 kilometers. The Vesuvius eruption column punched through that altitude and kept going, reaching the stratosphere, dispersing its ash and aerosols into the upper atmosphere where they would remain for months, affecting the climate of the northern hemisphere across the following year. At ground level, the pyroclastic surges, the fast-moving, ground-hugging avalanches of hot gas and volcanic debris that swept down the mountain's flanks, reached temperatures of approximately 300 degrees Celsius and moved at speeds of up to 700 kilometers per hour. 700 kilometers per hour. The speed of a commercial aircraft at cruising altitude, moving across the ground at 300 degrees. The people of Pompeii, who had not fled by the time the pyroclastic surges arrived, did not suffocate slowly or burn gradually. Detectives looking at the skeletal remains and the plaster casts of the bodies found in Pompeii revealed, from the position of the bodies and the condition of the bones, that death was effectively instantaneous. The extreme heat causing immediate muscle contraction, and the sudden postures that preserved in the hardened ash the last attitude of each person at the moment of their death. The catastrophe was complete in hours, and then the ash settled, and the mountain rested, and the landscape that the eruption had destroyed began, in the way that volcanic landscapes always begin after every eruption, to return. Slowly, invisibly at first, the first microbial colonizers moving into the cooling ash, the first wind-carried seeds landing on the gray surface, the first roots pushing into the nutrient-rich volcanic deposit that the eruption had left across the landscape for kilometers in every direction. Within a generation, the vineyards were replanted. Within a century, the slopes of Vesuvius were producing wine again. The mountain that had killed 11,000 people had, by doing so, deposited the volcanic material that made its slopes the most fertile agricultural land in the region. The catastrophe and the gift were the same event. Your body processes catastrophic events in the same way. When you sustain a significant injury, when the tissue is damaged and the inflammatory response is triggered, The process that follows is not simply repair of the specific damage. It is a cascade of cellular activity that, in repairing the damage, also produces a stronger, more densely organized tissue structure at the repair site than existed before the injury. The scar tissue that forms after a deep wound is, in terms of its mechanical strength per unit area, stronger than the original tissue it replaces. The body rebuilds stronger from catastrophe. The volcano rebuilds more fertile from eruption. Both systems use destruction as a precondition for a specific kind of construction that the undisturbed state could not produce. The largest eruption in recorded human history did not happen at Vesuvius. It happened in April 1815, on a small island in what is now Indonesia, at a volcano called Tombera. The eruption of Tombera ejected approximately 160 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere, approximately 160 times the volume ejected by the 1980 Mount St. Helens eruption that we encountered in Movement 2. It produced an eruption column that reached approximately 43 kilometers into the stratosphere. The sound of the explosion was heard approximately 2,000 kilometers away, in what is now Sri Lanka, in what is now Australia, by people who had no idea what they were hearing, who reported it as distant cannon fire and sent search parties to investigate. 2,000 kilometers. The distance from London to Moscow. From New York to Denver. Covered by the sound of a single explosion. Tombera killed approximately 71,000 people directly, through the eruption, the pyroclastic flows, and the tsunamis that the eruption triggered in the surrounding ocean. But the deaths that Tombera caused directly were a fraction of its total human cost. The aerosols that Tombera injected into the stratosphere, the sulfur dioxide that converted to sulfate particles and formed a thin, reflective veil in the upper atmosphere, reduced the amount of solar radiation reaching the Earth's surface across the entire northern hemisphere for the following year. The year 1816 became known as the year without a summer. In New England, snow fell in June. Frost killed crops in July and August. The harvest failed across large parts of North America and Europe. In Ireland, the crop failure contributed to a famine that killed tens of thousands. In China, the Yunnan province experienced its worst famine in recorded history. In India, the disruption of the monsoon pattern contributed to the emergence of a new strain of cholera that would spread across the world in the first of the great 19th century cholera pandemics. A single volcanic eruption in Indonesia in 1815 contributed to a cholera pandemic that killed millions of people across the world over the following decade. The monster of Tombera is not the eruption itself, not the column of ash or the pyroclastic flows or the tsunamis. The monster is the function, the injection of sulfate aerosols into the stratosphere that persisted long enough to reduce global surface temperatures by approximately 1 degree Celsius for a full year. 1 degree Celsius, averaged across the entire planet, from a single eruption. 1 degree Celsius is the difference between a growing season and a crop failure at the margins of agricultural viability, between a monsoon that arrives on schedule and one that is disrupted enough to fail, between a year of ordinary hardship and a year that enters the historical record as catastrophe. Detectives looking at the climatic record of the years following major volcanic eruptions, reading the temperature signatures preserved in ice cores, tree rings, and historical weather records, revealed that the Tombera eruption was not exceptional in producing climatic effects. Every large eruption that injects significant quantities of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere produces a measurable cooling signal in the global temperature record. The 1991 eruption of Mount Pinatubo in the Philippines, the second largest eruption of the 20th century, ejecting approximately 10 cubic kilometers of material, reduced global average temperatures by approximately 0.5 degrees Celsius for 2 years following the eruption. The Earth's temperature record is punctuated by volcanic signatures, dips in the tree ring record, acid layers in ice cores, historical accounts of crop failures and cold summers separated from their cores by thousands of kilometers of ocean and continent. But the largest volcanic event of the last 66 million years left no human account at all, because no human existed to record it. The Deccan Traps, the vast flood basalt province of what is now western India, were produced by one of the largest volcanic events in the geological record. Over approximately 1 million years straddling the boundary between the Cretaceous and Paleogene periods, approximately 66 million years ago, a mantle plume beneath what is now India produced eruption after eruption of enormous basaltic lava flows that accumulated to thicknesses of up to 2 kilometers across an area of approximately 500,000 square kilometers. 500,000 square kilometers of lava, up to 2 kilometers thick. An area larger than the entire country of Spain, covered to a depth of 2 kilometers in volcanic rock. The Deccan eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, contributing, detectives looking at the chemical records preserved in deep-sea sediment cores revealed, to the environmental disruption of the end Cretaceous period that coincided with, and may have been worsened by, the asteroid impact that ended the age of the dinosaurs. The asteroid gets the credit. The volcano was already working on the problem. But here is the fact that the catastrophe of the Deccan Traps, and the catastrophe of Tombera, and the catastrophe of Vesuvius all converge on, the fact that makes the long geological history of volcanic catastrophe something other than an unbroken record of destruction. Life came back. Every time. After Vesuvius, the vineyards. After Tombera, the agricultural recovery across the northern hemisphere within 2 to 3 years, the temperature signal fading as the stratospheric aerosols settled, the monsoon restoring its pattern, the harvest returning to the fields that had failed. After the Deccan Traps and the end Cretaceous extinction that killed 3/4 of all species on Earth, the recovery, the mammals that survived in the aftermath, the birds that descended from the dinosaurs that endured, the flowering plants that diversified into the dominant vegetation of the post-extinction world, the slow, patient, 70 million year construction of the biosphere that produced, eventually, the world you are lying in tonight. The world was built from the recovery, not from the catastrophe. From the recovery that the catastrophe made possible, the cleared landscape, the mineral-rich volcanic soil, the open ecological space that the extinction filled with new forms of life that the undisturbed Cretaceous world had no room for. You are a mammal. Your lineage survived the end Cretaceous extinction. Your ancestors, small, warm-blooded, probably nocturnal, hiding in burrows from the predators and the heat and the darkness of the impact winter, persisted through the catastrophe and emerged into a world whose dominant organisms had been removed. A world with empty niches. A world with fertile soil being produced from the Deccan Traps volcanic deposits. A world that, within 10 million years, would be filled with the diversifying mammals that eventually produced the primates that eventually produced you. The volcano that was already erupting when the asteroid arrived contributed to the catastrophe that cleared the landscape for your evolutionary lineage. The fire that helped end the dinosaurs helped begin you. Hold that thought the way the cooling lava holds the heat of the mantle. Not tightly, not urgently, but as something solid and real and worth knowing. The catastrophe is part of the story, not the whole story, not even the most important part. The most important part is what came after, what always comes after. In the geological record that spans 4.5 billion years of the Earth building and destroying and rebuilding with the patient certainty of a system that has never once run out of material or time. The mountain rests tonight, as you are resting, both of you cooling from the heat of the day, both of you building toward the next phase, the next growth, the next eruption, the next recovery from whatever the world produces between now and morning. The recovery always comes. It has always come, and it will come again. There is volcanic material in your bones right now, not metaphorically assembled from a loose chain of geological connections. Literally, the calcium in your bones, the phosphorus in your DNA, the magnesium in your muscle cells, the iron in your blood. These elements arrived in you through food, and the food grew in soil, and the soil formed from the weathering of rock, and a significant fraction of the world's most productive rock. The rock that feeds the most people, that grows the most food, that supports the densest human populations on the most fertile land, is volcanic. The Deccan traps that contributed to the end Cretaceous extinction also produced some of the most fertile agricultural soil in India. The volcanic deposits of the Indonesian archipelago feed one of the most densely populated regions on Earth. The basaltic soils of the Pacific Northwest, of the East African Rift, of the Canary Islands and Iceland, and the flanks of every active volcano that has been erupting and weathering and building soil for long enough. These soils carry in their chemistry the specific mineral composition of the mantle rock that produced them. The deep Earth's contribution to the surface world's fertility. And that fertility is in you. In the calcium that your bones assembled from the food that grew in volcanic soil. In the phosphorus that your DNA was built from. In the iron that your blood uses to carry the oxygen that is, right now, sustaining the last waking processes of a brain approaching sleep. All of it traceable. Not in the practical sense that any instrument you currently possess could trace it, but in the geological and biological sense that the chain of transfer from volcanic rock to mineral to soil to plant to animal to food to you is a real chain, with real chemical continuity at every link. You are the volcano's slow product, not its immediate product. Not the lava or the ash or the pyroclastic deposit. The slow product, the one that took millions of years of weathering and biological processing and food chain transfer to assemble from the raw material the eruption provided. You are what the lava becomes when it is given enough time and enough rain and enough life. Detectives looking at the isotopic composition of calcium in human bone tissue revealed that the specific ratio of calcium isotopes in your bones carries a faint signature of the geological sources of calcium that entered your food chain across your lifetime. Different geological environments produce calcium with slightly different isotopic ratios, the result of the different ages and origins of the rocks from which the calcium was weathered. Volcanic regions produce calcium with isotopic signatures distinct from ancient crystalline basement rocks. Sedimentary regions produce their own signature, and the food that grows in each region carries, in the calcium it contains, the faint isotopic fingerprint of the rock it grew on. Your bones carry the geological signature of where your food came from, not as a label you can read with the naked eye, as a chemical record, written in the ratio of isotopes, that a mass spectrometer could read as clearly as you are reading these words. Your skeleton is a geological archive, a record not only of your biological history, but of the geological history of the landscapes that fed you across your life. You carry the earth in your bones, and the earth you carry is partly volcanic. Now follow the heat, not the geological heat of the volcano itself, not the 2000-degree temperature of the magma chamber or the 300 degrees of the pyroclastic surge, but the residual heat. The heat that remains in the cooling lava for months after the eruption has ended. The heat that seeps upward through the new rock, warming the surface, accelerating the weathering, creating the microclimate that allows the first colonizers to establish themselves faster than they could on cold rock. That residual heat is a specific physical process. The cooling of a hot solid object, any hot solid object, from a lava flow to a loaf of bread to the body of a mammal lying still in a dark room, follows a mathematical pattern described by Newton's law of cooling. The rate of heat loss is proportional to the temperature difference between the object and its surroundings. When the object is much hotter than its surroundings, it cools quickly. As the temperature difference decreases, the cooling slows. The object approaches the temperature of its surroundings asymptotically, getting closer and closer to ambient temperature, the rate of change decreasing continuously, the final degree of temperature difference taking as long to close as all the previous degrees combined. The lava cools quickly at first, then more slowly still, until the temperature difference between the rock and the air above it is so small that only a sensitive thermometer can detect it. But the heat is still there, still dissipating, still warming the surface of the rock by a fraction of a degree above what the surrounding air alone would produce. Your body is doing this right now. Not cooling from 2000 degrees. Cooling from the slightly elevated temperature that your metabolic activity produces during the waking hours. The temperature that your body maintains a degree or two above your resting set point during the activity and digestion and cognitive work of the day. As you lie still in the dark, your core body temperature begins its nightly descent, dropping approximately 1 degree Celsius from its daytime peak toward the lower resting temperature of deep sleep, following the same mathematical curve that the cooling lava follows, the rate of change decreasing as you approach the set point, the system settling asymptotically toward the temperature that the maintenance metabolism of deep sleep requires. You are cooling, not toward ambient temperature, toward your own internal set point. But the physics is the same. Newton's law of cooling, operating in a biological system with its own thermostat, producing the gradual, decelerating temperature decline that is one of the most reliable physiological signals that sleep is approaching. The lava is cooling toward the temperature of the landscape around it. You are cooling toward the temperature that deep sleep requires. Both processes are governed by the same mathematics. Both are happening right now. And both. Here is the connection that ties the cooling lava to the sleeping body and the sleeping body to the 4.5 billion year story of a planet building itself from the inside out. Are building something. The cooling lava is building rock. Crystallizing, mineral by mineral, into the basalt that will weather into soil over the next 10,000 years, that will grow the forest that will eventually cover the flank of the volcano, that will feed the animals that will eventually deposit the organic material that will eventually become the soil that will eventually grow the food that will eventually become the calcium in the bones of someone who will lie in the dark one night and think about volcanoes. The cooling body is building the restoration that tomorrow requires. Consolidating the memories of today into the long-term storage structures that tomorrow will draw on. Clearing the metabolic waste of consciousness from the brain's channels. Restoring the neurotransmitter balances that the day depleted. Repairing the cellular damage that waking activity produces and that sleep reliably undoes. Given enough time and enough quiet and enough of the specific, restorative, physiologically distinct state of deep sleep. Both the lava and your body are using cooling as a precondition for construction. Both are building in the dark. Both are running the same patient, unhurried, mathematically governed process of settling toward equilibrium. The lava toward the temperature of the landscape, you toward the temperature of deep sleep, and doing their most essential constructive work in the space that the settling creates. Detectives looking at the relationship between core body temperature and sleep architecture, the specific sequence of sleep stages that a healthy night's sleep moves through, revealed that the onset of sleep is tightly coupled to the beginning of the core temperature decline. The brain's sleep-promoting systems and the body's temperature regulation systems are not independent. They are coordinated. The same neural circuits that promote sleep also drive the peripheral vasodilation that increases heat loss from the skin surface, producing the temperature decline that signals the onset of sleep. Sleep and cooling are the same process, initiated by the same neural systems, for the same physiological purpose. The volcano cools and builds. You cool and restore. Both are the same event, expressed in different materials, at different scales, across different timescales, but the same physics. The same patient mathematics of heat dissipating into the environment around it. The same building in the dark. If this descent has been useful to you tonight, if this slow journey from the asthenosphere to the magma chamber to the eruption column to the cooling lava to the first fern on the bare rock to the volcanic soil to the food to your bones, has helped the heat of the day begin its own patient dissipation into the quiet of tonight, then I would gently invite you to subscribe, or to leave a thought below about which part of this stayed with you longest. Whether it was the 60 kilometers of solid rock that the magma rises through over millions of years, or the vineyards of Pompeii replanted within a generation, or the mammals that survived the end Cretaceous catastrophe and filled the world that the volcano and the asteroid between them cleared, or simply the knowledge that the calcium in your bones carries the geological signature of the landscapes that fed you. It helps other people find their way here. Other people lying in their own dark above their own ancient eruptions, also beginning their nightly cooling, also building in the dark. 1 degree at a time. And if sleep is still arriving slowly, if the heat of the day has not yet fully dissipated, there is another journey waiting, another piece of the deep earth, another story of the planet building itself from the inside out, told at this same unhurried pace, in this same quiet voice, ready to carry you somewhere older and warmer and more patient than whatever is still radiating heat at the edge of your attention. It will be there when you need it. But for now, feel the weight of your body where it meets the surface beneath you. Feel how the surface receives that weight, the way the cooled lava field receives the weight of the first rain that falls on it. Completely, without resistance, allowing the weight to press into it, to find its level, to settle into the stable configuration that gravity and the surface together determine. You are the cooling rock. You are the heat dissipating into the dark. You are the mineral settling into the form it will hold when the temperature reaches equilibrium. Allow your shoulders to soften now, the way the lava surface softens when the flow beneath it slows, not collapsing, not losing its structure, just releasing the tension that movement creates, settling into the shape that stillness allows. Allow your jaw to unclench. Allow your hands to open. Allow the thoughts that are still warm at the surface of your mind, still carrying the heat of the day's activity, to begin their own cooling, to lose their sharp edges as the temperature drops, to become less defined, less urgent, less hot. Your core temperature is already falling, 1/10 of a degree at a time, following Newton's law, following the same mathematics that governs the cooling lava 60 kilometers above the place where the magma formed, following the curve that leads, patiently and certainly and without any effort on your part, toward the temperature that deep sleep requires. 60 kilometers below the ground you are lying on, the rock is still moving, slowly, certainly, in the dark. It has been moving all your life. It moved while you were born, while you grew, while you learned everything you know, while you lived every day that brought you to tonight. It is moving now. It will be moving while you sleep. And you are its slow product, the cooled rock, the weathered soil, the food chain's patient output, the calcium and the phosphorus and the iron and the carbon assembled from the mantle's long generosity into the specific, temporary, extraordinary organization of matter that is you, lying still, cooling, building in the dark, as the planet has always built, as you have always built, every night, in the dark. Nothing needs solving. Nothing needs heat. The cooling is the building. Let it happen. Let the temperature fall. Let the rock settle into its final form. Let the day's heat dissipate into the quiet around you. You are 60 kilometers above the moving rock, and the moving rock is 60 kilometers below you. Both of you in the dark. Both of you doing your work. Sleep well, and good night.